All right. Good evening, everybody, wherever you may be. It's Thursday night, and at least here in sunny Los Angeles, it's 5 p.m. Pacific time. And that could only mean but one thing. It's time to head out to the yard. So welcome to everybody to the yard. And thanks for joining us. I think this is our 8th or 9th episode, and it's been a gas every single time we do this. My name is Richard Bronson. I am the founder and CEO of 70 Million Jobs, which is an employment platform for folks with records. And I'm also the founder and CEO of Commissary Club, which is a social network for folks with records. I am one of your hosts, and I am joined by two very dear friends and also teammates in our work. Number one is Seth Sundberg. Hello, Seth.
Hello, Richard. How are you?
Seth, the big man, as he is generally known in all different types of communities.
It does feel like you're about to announce my number too, like the big man in the middle.
Big man in the middle.
Yeah.
And I'm going to shoot a T-shirt to the crowd.
A T-shirt to the crowd.
Seth once played for the LA Lakers with a young Kobe Bryant. And we are joined by our other friend, who is a legend, no doubt. And he's a rap star. He's an entrepreneur of note. His name is Victor Lombard, but mostly people know him as Divine. Hey, D, how are you?
So, D.
Thank you for having me. Y'all.
Thank you for having us, D. What is the yard for the benefit of folks who haven't been with us before? Let me explain for those who have been here. I don't know, go get a beer. The yard is part of Commissary Club, which I described before. We firmly believe that, that there are we know that there are 70 million of us, people with records. That's 1 in 3 adults, which most people find is a mind-blowing statistic. And most people, unless you've done time or you're close to someone who have really very little insight, into who these people are, and even less about what life is all about behind bars, other than what they've seen on TV or in the movies. And our hope and our kind of the reason why we do this is that by the end of this episode, or at a certain point, you'll come to understand that, we're just regular schmucks like anybody else. We're perfectly imperfect. We love our families, we worry about money, we try to be the best we can be. Sometimes we succeed, sometimes not so much. But what we want to do here in the yard is sort of, in a way, simulate the experiences that we all had when we were in prison, when we were let out into the yard. And you can get a feel of what it's really like and what goes on and what's said and what is felt. Again, we're just average people, but we're in very unaverage circumstances. In the yard, generically, people connect. People laugh, they argue a lot, they fight with one another, of course. They make things up, because when you're in prison, you could sort of be whoever you want to be. And sometimes there's a lot of sadness too, And typically, you don't want to show your weakness, so you're not going to go with tears, maybe you'll sort of let it out. But whatever it is, always very human. And that's really what we're, eager to share with you. As a little housekeeping, if you have questions or comments, please, which already a number of people have done, and we will try to address as many of your thoughts and questions as we can. Our dear friend Adrian, who is also part of our team and really the brains behind all of this, she manages things behind the scenes. So if, for example, you'd like to join the conversation at a certain point, we typically will let in a couple of people halfway through. And if you want to be part of it, let her know, through the chat, excuse me, through the chat mechanism on the bottom of the screen. So without much ado, let me tell you who we've got tonight. We had a woman that we were really excited about having join us by the name of Carol Leonard. We will have her back, but unfortunately, Carol was not feeling well. And she asked everybody to please forgive her absence, but we'll have her back and I'm looking forward to it. But, we're not gonna let that get us down because we have a great friend of ours who's joining us as well. First, we have a guy by the name of Aaron Kinzel. Is that right, Kinzel or Kinzel?
It don't matter, Richard. Either or. Tomato,
Okay.
tomato.
Okay, the Aaron part, did I get that right?
The Aaron part is correct.
Hey,
Absolutely.
50.
Good. Aaron is a very interesting guy. I think you'll all come to agree. Aaron's LinkedIn page has a big headline on the top, and it says, formerly incarcerated professor. Aaron is a lecturer at the University of Michigan, at a top university, and he lectures on criminology. And he also is the executive director of the Youth Justice Fund, which is an organization that helps returning citizens who were sentenced when they themselves were juveniles. Aaron, this is really interesting to me, Aaron describes his upbringing as being a family that had a lot of unlawfulness going on pretty much all around him. He ended up serving 10 years in prison himself, and he had his prison sentence begin at a very young age. So I think he's got a lot of interesting things he's ready to share with us. Aaron, thank you so much for joining us.
What's up, Aaron?
Thank you for having me, Richard, and great to be here.
And incidentally, I asked him about the background. Some people have these phony computer-generated backgrounds. That, in fact, is where Aaron is standing, which is a prison.
Exactly. I'm sitting behind a Ireland prison right now.
Right. Aaron is he's on a madcap tour of Europe, visiting prisons, and right now he's in Ireland, and that's the prison behind him. Joining Aaron is a very good friend of ours who's been on the yard before. His name is Craig Cesal. Hey, Craig, how are you?
Hey.
I'm well.
I know, you look great. Craig, back in the day, Craig had a very successful business. He was a successful businessman. He was in the business of leasing tractor trailers, these big rigs. One of his customers was a very large distributor of marijuana. And back in 2002, federal agents discovered 1,500 pounds of pot in one of Craig's trucks.
Holy shit.
I'm not sure how it got there, but it was there. And Craig was implicated in that, and he was arrested. Apparently, all his co-defendants pled out with deals, leaving Craig really as the only guy, standing, sort of. And ultimately, he took the fall for that. And what a fall it was. He had no prior offenses. And he was, however he was involved, it was with pot, a drug that I can walk down the street in LA and there are beautiful stores selling pot, like it's Neiman Marcus. But back when Craig was, involved, it wasn't so much that way. The judge threw the book at Craig, I think it's fair to say. For his involvement in marijuana, Craig received a life sentence. A life sentence. sorry, a life sentence for dealing pot. Now, back last June in 2020, Craig, after serving 2 decades in prison, was temporarily released on a compassionate basis owing to the coronavirus and the risk of his incarceration that posed. He knew full well when they let him out that at any minute they could drag his sorry ass back to prison for the rest of his life, which, you know, it's hard to imagine what life must be under, you know, every time the phone rings. But when the phone did ring that fateful night, not too long ago, it was from the White House letting him know that no, he wouldn't be returning to prison, but in fact, he received a pardon. And Craig, since then, has been out. He's still under supervised release, but Craig, our dear friend, is not going back to prison. And we all couldn't be happier that he's back here with us. So Craig, my brother, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. This is a heck of a ride, just finding society and finding everybody that I remembered, you know, back out in it.
Yeah.
Well, you found us for better or for worse, and you stuck with us. Now, Craig, we've done this before, and so some of you who are in the audience are familiar with this, and some of you, I'm just going to ask you for your indulgence and your patience and your trust. I'm going to ask everybody first, all of our guests, my co-hosts, and everybody who's listening. First, everybody just take a deep breath. Just let it out. And just relax. Now, I'm going to ask everybody to shut their eyes. Just close your eyes, if you will. And I'm going to ask you to sort of let your mind just go wherever it's going to go. You know, and I'm going to ask you, if you can, to imagine that, as sad as it is to say, you are currently incarcerated. You're in prison. Now, for some of us who have been in prison, perhaps it's not so hard to imagine. For those of you who haven't, let me fill in some of the blanks. If you're in prison, there's a good chance you're sharing a cell. They call those people your cellie, believe it or not. It's like a nice, sweet name. But that person inevitably is about 6'9". You know, they're men or they're women. It doesn't really matter. And they weigh 300 pounds. And your cell is this tiny little space that has 3 cinder block walls and 1 wall where it's bars generally. And if you stood in the middle of it and put your arms out, you could probably touch either side of the walls. And you've been in that cell for God knows how long. And you're breathing the same air as your cellie day after day after day. Maybe you're lying back in your bunk and you're noticing, you know, through the bars, you're seeing guards carrying stretchers of fellow inmates, maybe friends of yours who have come down with the coronavirus. And they're sick, they're really sick and they're coughing. And there are people that they're kind of carting away, you know, that you don't want to really think about it, but maybe you're never going to see these people again. Some of them won't be coming back. But once a day, amidst all of this, amidst guards yelling at you, amidst waiting on lines for no reason at all, amidst the terrible food and the terrible medical care and the terrible, they have an announcement and they let you know it's your turn to go out into the yard. Here's your chance to get outside. Now, there are walls around, and depending on how the level of security in your prison, there may be lots of barbed wire and turrets and guards with guns and rifles standing there, or maybe it's just a wooden fence, or maybe whatever. But you're allowed to go out into the yard, which is typically a big open flat space. And when you go out into the yard, well, I've only seen men's prisons when I go out into the yard, you know, there are guys throwing around a football. and there are guys playing basketball. And then there are guys who are working out where with the weights, they call that the weight pile. But on this particular day in the yard, you do what you did yesterday and what you'll do probably tomorrow. And that is you walk over to that same spot where your friends, your guys or your girls are day after day after day, where they hang out. And you can just sit there in their company. And if it's a nice day, you lean back and you let the warmth of the sun, come down on you. And you're talking to people, and maybe you're sharing some bad news from home that's upsetting, and you're trying to sort of buck up the emotions of your friends. Or maybe someone's off on some, ridiculous, they're telling you about how they were big shots on the outside, or, you're laughing, or you're talking about politics, or whatever the hell it is. You're just hanging out with your friends. And you're laughing and you're yelling and you're arguing and you're just doing what friends do when they hang out. And what's so special about this is for these few moments, for the 45 minutes or the hour or whatever that they let you out there, you're no longer all wearing the same khakis. You're no longer getting yelled at by guards. You're no longer looking out through bars. But for these few moments, these precious moments, you're actually a human being. At least you could tell yourself that. At least you could remind yourself that you're a human being with family and friends on the outside that are desperately worried about you and thinking about you, and you're thinking about them. So you'll laugh a little bit and you'll hold back the tears if something is sad, because on the yard, you don't want to show that sort of weakness. And maybe you'll just sort of walk away so you can let the tears out where no one will see you. But it's a few moments that you're actually a human being. That's what we're after here. That's what we're looking for in one another. And that's what we'd like to share with you tonight. So please, everybody, open your eyes. Thank you for indulging me. Thank you for going on this little trip with me. And let's get this started. This is not interviews, because the five of us are just on the yard and nobody interviews anybody on the yard, but just to get it going. I have to ask, Aaron, because it was so interesting to me. And I'm not really interested in right now what your life is today, but much more interested about what it was in prison. But still, I have to ask. Your headline on your LinkedIn, as I mentioned, says formerly incarcerated professor, not professor, comma, formerly incarcerated. It's almost like, it sounds to me, that there's a certain amount of pride in what you went through and how you came out of it. And that's kind of the way I feel. And I'm wondering, is that what motivated you to write what you wrote?
I don't know if it's pride, Richard, but I would say it's accountability and it's acceptance. So like, I own that. I am like, a convict, I'm a felon, whatever you want to like put that label on me. I think my identity is deeply impacted by my time in the penitentiary. So no matter what I do, I'll always be a convict first and a professor second, a doctoral student, all those other taglines on LinkedIn. So that's a huge part of my identity. I think a big difference with the yard, thinking about how I grew up in prison as a kid, and I was locked up at the earliest 15, later in the penitentiary 18. In prison, you live in two places. You live in the past and the future.
Yeah.
And out on the streets, we always live in the moment. So I think that's the two dramatic differences between the inside and the outside, is that, when we're on the yard, we're constantly talking about reminiscing about the past.
No.
And trying to create an ideal future for us, what we want to see out on the streets. But here out on the streets, most people don't give a shit about what happened yesterday or what they're going to do tomorrow. They're living in the moment. They're playing with their fucking phone. They're just living in the moment. They're absorbed in the moment. There's no, a forethought of what, they could be or what they do. So I think that's what really brought me a lot of success, was having those conversations on the yard with really good friends of mine that, I talked about my dreams, my demons, all this crazy stuff I went through as a kid, and to kind of realize that for me to move forward in life, I had to own that identity of who I was and what I did. And I think that's been my greatest success, is to kind of build off that and realize that, look, that's a part of who I am and I can never take that away.
And you call that a success?
I call it a success. I took some really crazy shit that happened to me as a kid. And then stuff that I did, you know, to get involved in the juvenile justice system and the adult criminal justice, which was extreme levels of violence. Like, I started a shootout with the police when I was an 18-year-old kid. So that kind of tells you the wackiness that I was involved in. But that's how my family was, and I grew up around that, and that doesn't take away my accountability. It's just a way to kind of premise and understand that many people that are justice involved, particularly for violence, or even drug activity, or like, it's learned behavior. You grow up in you know, a certain area, and that's all you see. You know, there is a choice, but like, the easier choice is to get involved in the game, to be very frank.
All right, well, we're going to get into that. Craig, you spent a lot of time in prison where you perhaps were convinced that this is where you were going to spend the rest of your life. Did you think about the future, or did you just kind of write it off and concede that, you know, this is my future, it's my today, and there's nothing, you know, really to think about for the future?
Really, I fought for the future, and sometimes that future wasn't years out. Sometimes you fight for, you know, to get the food better in the prison. You fight to, you know, make it so that they would open the yard on all the days, not just the days when the cops felt like opening it. You got into a bunch of these fights, looking at the future, looking at what you can change. And even those small battles made it, the passing at the time, better. You were working towards a future where things were happening. And I even enjoyed, you know, talking to the guys and counseling a lot of the guys that were about to get out, which was kind of odd because a lot of them would say, you know, man, I'm sorry to talk to you about getting out in, you know, 4 months and all that, when I know you got a life sentence, and, you know, they come with that. No, I'd like to hear people, you know, that are working on their happy ending, you know, that helps me, you know, want to work towards my own, and, you know, want to look that I could have my own. And I did, you know, as you know, I kept fighting. You can't imagine how many times my fights in courts were turned down. I was turned down for clemency twice before this January. You know what I mean? But I kept fighting, and I inspired a lot of people to get behind me to fight just because they saw me fighting. They would line up. Sometimes some of the gangs would each send a few of their members to me with grievances to all file on the same issue. So now they see the whole compound file 120 grievances on one issue. And somebody snitched me out. They knew it was me behind it. But everybody was fighting together, and we all got a victory out of it. So everybody in the whole population reveled in the victory we got when they added dessert back in. You know, when they, you know, gave us our Kool-Aid back instead of just ice water. You know, they seemed like really small fights, but they were big fights for us at the time. You know,
Craig,
give us butter for our bread. Yeah,
Kool-Aid, man.
How much of that is ingrained in, like, just keeping hope right on, you know, inside, and every victory, no matter how small, even if it's just getting through the day, right, keeps you moving, right? What I mean, I can't even imagine, like, doing an elbow, right? What there's got to be days that you're just like, man, this is bullshit, right? Like, this is whatever. And then, you know, something would happen. You're like, okay, did you just search for that hope and try to hold on to it?
you do. What I would do is, especially when you serve a really long sentence and you're given a really long sentence, your hope is that the direct appeal is going to cure this and you're going to be going home soon.
Yeah.
Well, sure as shit that fails, you know.
So
Then there's a post-conviction relief.
So did you go through, I had a you know, certainly compared to you, I had a short sentence. And for me, you know, my attitude was, all right, this is terrible, but, you know, it has a beginning, it has an end. Whereas I'm sure there were moments where you know, while you tried to remain positive and hopeful that something like what happened would happen. You know, I just always thought, like, how can you really just sit there knowing that the rest of my life might be spent in this miserable circumstance? Like, How did you just keep going?
You get up and say, I'm going to make it worthwhile. If not for me, for everybody else. Like I say, you work to make your future, even if your future's in the prison. And, you work to make those changes. You work to help those other guys walk out the door.
Oh,
So you still move forward in prison. You don't stop living in prison. You just, you make the best of it. You still move forward. You still accomplish things.
When you were early in your bid, did you? When I was down, I went through a transition facility and met a guy that he had done 13 years and he gave back his life. He had just given his life sentence back, and that's kind of where I met him. But he was saying that in the first 2 years that he was down, he's like, man, I never got out of bed. He's like, what the fuck are they gonna do to me? You know what I mean? I'm here forever. Like,
yeah. How did it take you an adjustment to have the attitude that you ultimately had, Craig?
No, really, from the beginning, I was just determined that this life wasn't gonna stick. One way or another, I was gonna walk out the front gate. I was just determined from the day I got that sentence that it was gonna change. Yeah. And I kept that determination. And as you know, I luckily, it did change. And I think I mentioned to you earlier about a friend of mine that I hung around with in the prison since 2011. He had gotten a marijuana charge in 1994. He was sentenced to 30 years. Being a new prisoner and a kind of a young guy, he came in going crazy and all that. So really, he lost his first 10 years a good time. Making hooch, getting at bites, doing all the things that a new young guy does. I was already in my 40s when I went in. But that guy, him and I got to be good friends. And he went through those same roller coasters of denied, 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 denied. And somebody talked him into the middle of February to putting in a compassionate release filing because he had about 1.5 years to do on his sentence left. But they said, even when you only have that much left, put in this compassionate release thing. Some of these people are getting relief in light of the COVID. Sure enough, last Friday, the court granted it.
Wow.
But the more amazing part is 2 weeks before, on the phone, his daughter had told him that she had had a dream, that he came knocking on her front door and told her that the prison had let him out early. So he kept that, there was really nobody that knew. Me and a couple of advocates knew that he was going to get out. And he kept that under his hat. And sure enough, he left the prison at 5 o'clock on Monday. And by 6:30 on Monday, he had gotten into his daughter's house and sat down in the living room and was waiting for her to come home.
That's amazing.
Yes.
So, Aaron, you mentioned that at age 50, well, let me just back up. And if you don't want to talk about this, well, you better. You mentioned that you had a family life, that it was not a Norman Rockwell childhood for you, right? Is that fair?
That's kind of underplaying it a little bit, but sure, go ahead.
What was it like? What was the circumstances?
I mean, briefly, it's hell on wheels. And just before I answer that, I want to say a really quick point about something Craig said. For the long timers and the lifers, I think there was a really interesting philosophical standpoint that was played out in the Shawshank Redemption, where Red and Andy are talking about this moment to where Red is saying hope is a dangerous thing. And Andy's like, hope is the only fucking thing you got.
Yeah.
About getting out. So I think that's a really interesting point to where, like I was saying before, the future context, but some people, get in that mindset, I'm never going to leave, but I'm going to build a future here in prison for myself, while others really kind of focus on the, I'm going to eventually get out, even if I do have life. So I think that's an interesting parallel between the two.
It's an amazing sentence that you even said, I'm going to build a future here in prison.
Yeah.
That's even did you ever feel that way, D? That you I can make something happen. Well, you did. You got out. You used your time.
I mean, with or without life, when you're doing an Olympic sentence, you just look at it yo, you have to build a life there. You just have to, and that the reality sets in, and you just got to do it. If you don't, and you keep your mind on the outside, as we say, your mind's in a free world, but your body's incarcerated.
Mhm.
The whole thing is that you gotta, you know what I'm saying? You gotta think about like, I got time to do, man. You gotta function accordingly, man. Keep your sanity.
It's amazing.
Survival.
So what was it like when you were 13, 14, 12, Aaron, that was so crazy about your home life?
I think the worst part was when I was much younger. Like when I was 5 or 6, I seen all kinds of violence in my community. I grew up in the projects of Toledo, Ohio. So I went from the violence of the inner city into rural white America, which a lot of people don't really understand the violence that is out in the middle of nowhere with crazy hillbillies that have millions of guns and there's no cops anywhere to like really control anything that's going on. I've seen people murdered in the projects, but I've seen people murdered in very grotesque ways and things that I can't even talk about here in the middle of nowhere in a pig field. So like, and at the age of 8, my stepfather tried to murder me. I watched him beat my mother. He's beat me. He shot at me with a 357 Magnum. So this violence is just constant in my life. But like with a lot of the people that I know that went in for violent offenses, and again, this doesn't excuse it, we were exposed to violence at a young age. So all that trauma that I faced as a child helped me grow in a way that in order for me to survive, I had to become aggressive, assertive, and violent, or I would be dead right now.
You adapted, yeah, you adapted to circumstances.
Absolutely. But the thing that I feel bad for, in all honesty, is that was a huge part, my environmental factor, you know, my nurturing the environment, but also nature inherently. As I started to like be subjected to violence, and then as a teenager, Richard, like 12, 13, I started to become violent more. So I did the shift and I felt bad for it. And I knew some of the stuff I was doing was wrong. And yet I still had this rational choice or will that I said, you know, even though I know what I'm doing is wrong, I'm going to do it. I'm not going to let anybody fuck with me ever
But in fact, at that age, with the trauma you went through, there was an illusion of free will. You know, I mean, it's pretty overwhelming to be that young, to go through that, and then to say, well, you know better, you know, and you're responsible. I mean,
right. I don't know. I disagree. I mean, I think you're right, but also I push back because like, again, I think it's really 50-50. It's half I was groomed that way and I became that because of my environment, but the other half is that, you know, I still made choices. No one put a gun in my hand as a kid, and no one said, Aaron, go shoot at the police.
Yeah. So Aaron, that's a great point. When you know, and when you're down, like you make another choice, right? Like to get to where you are now, right? Because you could continue, you could well just continue that path and continue that violent streak once you get out and go into that. I mean, at what point did you make that choice to go, all right, you know, fuck this, like, yeah, I mean, you work on some stuff, or was it conscious? Was it one day? Was it over a period of time? Tell us about that.
Yeah, I think a lot of people think it's like an epiphany moment. I think that's what we see in the movies where everybody just has an aha moment. They wake up and they've been saved, or, you know, they change their mindset. I don't think that's really true. I think it's very incremental. I mean, that's my experience, and many other people I've worked with, it's very incremental, that change. I think age is a huge factor. So kind of like Craig said, these young kids, me going in at 18, I was a violent psychopath. I don't know how else to put it. You know, I would be on the yard, physically violent with staff, other prisoners. But then the unique piece was guys like Craig that were doing life. So I got the young kids over here saying, Aaron, let's go smash this dude. And then I got the older guys over here saying, Aaron, you're a smart kid. You need to smarten the fuck up. You're never going to get out of here. So I had these two dualities, like trying to push me in.
So let's get into that. You're 15 and you got locked up for the first time, right? Okay. Were you conscious of, okay, I'm here, I better, you know, this is a violent environment and I better be assertive. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to take shit from anybody. Did you get in a fight your first day? You know, what was it like to be 15 years old locked up?
So the first day I was locked up at 15, the night before, I beat the shit out of 2 police officers at a basketball game just because they put their hands on me and said I smell like weed. So that was me as a kid. Some man comes at me aggressively. It doesn't matter if they're a cop, a judge, or whoever, I respond with violence. So that's internal and external. So I get put in solitary confinement. My first few days in the juvenile justice system, I didn't have any interaction with anybody. They put me in solitary. I had no interaction with anyone for a few days.
You know, I have to interject, and this is probably things you talk about. academically, but the United States is the only country that puts juveniles into
In
solitary confinement.
segregation, yes, absolutely.
We're the
And
only,
it's hell on earth. It's the worst possible place. It's horrible for adults, but to put a child that's brain is still developing in that type of environment, I guarantee you that's part of the reason why I became more violent later on. Because it inhibits cognitive functionality, it creates anxiety, it creates paranoia, psychosis, hallucinations,
did
all
you
those
feel
things.
that, all of that coming on to you? Did you experience it, in fact?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I used to do acid a lot and mushrooms when I was a kid, and to be very honest, in other countries where it's legal and other places I've recreationally done stuff like that, I actually find it, when it's done medicinally, it's very interesting and useful. But as a kid, it certainly wasn't the case. But I've
Right.
had more intense hallucinogenic experiences as a teenager in solitary confinement than I have on like 5 or 6 hits of acid or
Dang.
eating a handful of mushrooms.
Wow.
And not a good trip, like I was having a great time and was loving the colors and smelling the music and all that shit, but very intense, nightmarish, demonic, weird shit, anxiety, thinking you're having a heart attack and dying because like there's days I went without food. Like you get on this thing called Food Loaf, which I'm sure some of you guys have heard of. Everybody knows what Food Loaf is, has been in prison, or this brown bag thing, and they turn your water off because someone flooded your cell. Like there was points I literally went 2 or 3 days without eating. Like, I mean, that induces its own type of like hallucinogenic experience on top of the chaos that is, this isolated penitentiary within
And
a prison.
how long were you in the shoe for? Yeah.
So in the beginning, as a 15-year-old, it was just a week or two. Later on in life, when I was 18, when I got locked up in the county jail for my case with the violence with law enforcement, I spent a year and a half in the county and probably close to a year of that time in segregation.
Yeah.
Because I would constantly fight with the guards. Everybody was testing me, and I would just always respond with violence. Later on in prison, I think the longest stint I did was probably 9 or 10 months. And then later on, a few months here or there. So really long periods of time, but I have friends that have done way more,
Right.
honestly, Seth, like that have done 5, 10, 20
Right.
years in seg straight, which is just, I can't even describe that,
No, for
it's,
sure.
it's just
For
beyond
sure.
torture.
I did 4 months in the shoe, and I was
And
like,
that's hard. That's
I'm
super
good. Like I'm not gonna be a bad boy anymore, Mama. Trust
Yeah.
me. Like,
So you think it broke you? Like, do you think that's where you kind of like, was it a deterrent?
I had made a decision that I was gonna get out.
He's
and I was-
uncomfortable.
Yeah.
I would say Kimberly in our audience mentions, I hope you don't mind that I use your name, Kimberly, but her daughter at age 15 did 4 months of solitary. So
Yeah.
it's not just, it's
Yeah.
not a rarity. It happens all
No,
the time.
it's very common, and it's horrific, Richard.
I'll tell you this.
Of
So
all the things that we can do with justice reform nationally in this country, I think the segregation and solitary confinement of juveniles is the worst thing that we're doing.
Were you in state or federal, Aaron?
I was in state facilities, but my case it was actually in one of the whitest places on earth, out in Maine, in New England. Nobody knows where the hell that is unless you've seen The Shawshank Redemption or read another Stephen King novel. But when I got into the shootout with law enforcement, they were going to take me federal. And I
Okay.
actually had a chance to get some really good guidelines, but as a kid, I really wasn't savvy to where, the point system and all that.
Right,
So
right.
I had my attorney advocate for me because it was state troopers to put it as a state case. And I ended up getting screwed. If I would have went to the feds, I think with my guidelines, I would have got 7 years. I ended up getting 19 years, all but
Wow.
11 years straight. So a split sentence.
Mm.
Wow. You served
Now-
11 total?
I'm sorry, Dick.
You served 11 total, Aaron?
I did almost 10 straight because Maine was one of the few states that had good time. So we did 85% of our time with truth and sentencing.
It's like Fed.
I lost a lot of good time all the time in and out of
Right.
seg, but I still got a chunk knocked off, so I didn't have to serve that full 11. And what was unique about Maine is they had a mandatory parole system, which I loved. I really hated the whole system, but what they did really right there is that once you hit your minimum, you were automatically released. There was no parole board.
Oh,
So
wow.
what Michigan does, where I live now, it's horrific. Like they have these huge tail end sentences. So you might have a 10 to 50. Once you're at your min at 10, they're not letting you out. They often
Right.
hold people till their 30th or 40th year
Right,
before they show interest in parole, which is just
Right.
bullshit.
right, yeah. That's crazy.
Somebody asked, what's the difference between solitary and segregation? And
Tomato, just
it's the
same.
same thing.
Right, I was gonna say, it was the same thing. Yeah.
It's putting someone all alone
Yeah.
23 hours a day, so that all of a sudden there are little creepy crawlies that are appearing in the corner of your mind and all kinds of weird shit.
Sudoku saved me in the shoe. I just had
Sudoku.
Mine was chess, Seth. I would play
Yeah,
with
there
my
you go.
celly next to me through the vent. We would do
Oh.
chess.
So did you ever, you didn't have to go through that. You stayed out of trouble basically, didn't you, Craig?
Oh, yeah. I did plenty of time in the shoe.
Oh, you did? Why? What got you there?
Usually because I was leading something that the administration didn't like. So, leading strikes to get, like one at the U.S. Penitentiary at Big Sandy, they didn't allow us to have legal calls during the weekdays. So a bunch of us started filing stuff, started acting up, and they found me to be the leader, and they sent me in the shoe for about 6
Leadership
months.
role.
Craig, it sounds like you got a big career, a big future in politics, man. Like I see it in your future.
Run for office, man.
There's that one of the things that I think TV and movies gets right is they have the image of the warden sort of being this imperial emperor of their
Dictator.
domain, and they are in complete and total control of this environment. And typically prisons, as opposed to jails, prisons are sort of in the middle of nowhere, generally, where they can have big open field, land really cheap.
Antelope capital of the world.
Yeah, and it's a big part of the economy of this little town, and they're the largest employers of the town. And the warden really is utterly, it's in control, answerable to nobody, in fact.
That's
and
true.
Certainly throwing Craig's ass in prison, in solitary, because he, made a trouble about something. Because they're desperately afraid is that people are going to complain, and it's going to get them in trouble with their boss, or that if someone has some connections, it becomes political or whatever. But if you're on the warden's bad side, or even a guard's bad, I got on a guard's bad side, and it was just the worst thing I could possibly go through.
Diesel therapy.
And
That's right.
These people, they have very little going on in their life other than their ability to make you miserable.
Oh, you mean to fuck with you?
To fuck with you, and they take full advantage of
they do.
They got to keep from being bored too.
They love it.
In other words, I should have been more compassionate towards this guy for the way he treated me, is what you're saying.
You mean more respectful?
Well, yeah, that definitely would have helped too. But it's
Richard, that makes me think so we often hear the criminal justice system is broken. Yeah. And I often stand up and do public speaking before COVID and say that's actually total bullshit. Prisons are actually, in the criminal justice system as a whole, is the greatest successful American business experiment in our entire history.
Absolutely.
They're exactly
Very
what
successful.
they're designed to do. Yes, they are set up as systems of control. Yeah. They're a paramilitary complex, like you talked about the warden and these lieutenants.
Oh, I love it. I love it, Aaron. Speak on it.
Yeah, they're all just, a mechanism to control, surveil, and, demolish certain communities.
Yes,
I mean, let's be real. That's what it's all about. It's not a broken system.
Hold on.
It's designed very well, actually.
How much of prison did you guys see in the last year with what came down with Corona restrictions and all of the things? And I was like, it was like the same. I'm like, oh, this is the same thing they do in prison, and this is the same thing they do in prison.
Okay, I don't think you guys.
Exactly the same thing.
They locked us down.
Yeah.
Yes.
And you couldn't do this, you couldn't do that, and they called it coronavirus. But that was a good day in prison.
Exactly. And it was like, this is the best prison I've ever been in.
I know. All right, so let me ask you guys to change the subject a little bit here. Aaron and Craig, you're two white guys, I've noticed. Were you faced with, racial things, gang things when you came to prison that you had to deal with, either Aaron, when you were very young at 15 or 17, when you were transferred, was that part of your reality? And, what was that like?
So for me, my father was Hispanic. Most people don't know that, but when I joke, like when I went to Maine, it was uber white. So a lot of the prisoners look like me. But actually, ironically, like for the small population of racial minorities, that African Americans and large indigenous population, I used to kick it with a lot of them, to be frank. So like some of my best friends were natives. So where I was unique. It was a maximum security facility, but there was really no gang activity because there wasn't enough of a huge racial divide that really necessitated that. There were certainly cliques, but there was not this racial divide. And I went in '97, so that was the height of mass incarceration under the Clinton administration, shortly after the Omnibus Crime Bill in '94. But then, like towards the end of my sentence, they created a lot of railways that were going up into Maine from Boston and other places down in New Hampshire that created this huge influx of racial minorities. And then as I was starting to there started to become these racial tensions.
Really?
And it was just really interesting for me because even though a lot of my family are racist hillbillies that I hate, I've never been racist my whole life. In fact, most of my friends are people of color. And I just find that I think the deeper connection for me is that a lot of them often have come from these marginalized communities, and I grew up in the project. So I think I identify more with that, even though I kind of like being out in the country. I don't like a lot of these, uber racist assholes sometimes that live out there, but I like my separation from society. I just don't like living in the city because there's a million people there.
Okay. What about you, Craig? You came in with a life sentence, which generally in prison affords you a high level of respect. And people,
Yeah.
right? But I don't remember us talking about this. Did you have to address any of these kind of situations?
Well, and yes, but coming into the system with the life sentence, they put you in a joint where most of the people have a life sentence.
Right.
I started out in USP Atlanta, and I made them mad pretty fast. And you've heard about the statement that they put you on the first thing smoking. I only lasted 2 weeks in Atlanta, and they put me on a bus to Big Sandy, Kentucky, in the middle of nowhere.
Diesel therapy for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
I was in USP Atlanta too.
okay. And well, at Big Sandy, the population was almost all black. Out of 1,500 people on the compound, we never had 200 white guys.
Wow.
And
Was that frightening to you initially?
it was overwhelming because over 800 of them were DC inmates, so that they all had kind of that background of being from the same place,
Them DC dudes, man. Oh man.
Oh yeah. This was after they had closed down Lorton, which was the prison for DC.
Yo, man.
And we had all their lifers. But so there's rules in the prison, as we all learned. You have to get in the white line to go get your food, not the black line. In front of the TV, you have to go sit in front of the white TV, not the black TV, or at the black table.
Good point about the TVs. I know the TV stuff. The line, food line, not.
Okay, so let me ask you about the food line that you're asking about. Who oversaw that, and how did you first learn of it? Did you just notice it, or did someone clue you in early?
Formal rules, yeah.
Well, be honest, at Big Sandy, I was amongst the first 21 people that opened the prison, and I was really new and green the prison. 3 of the 21 they opened the prison with already had bodies in the BOP. They had already killed other prisoners.
Wow, was
so
that
this
a pen?
is the kind of group I went in with.
And that was a pen, Craig?
Yes.
Okay.
And a level 6 pen. And so they got to teach me the rules right off. I got mentored essentially right off by then. But after a while, you kind of make your own way. I wasn't one to ride in the white car. I wasn't, Of course, I would sit at the white tables and all that because you don't dare otherwise. But I remember back then on Pork Chop Day, I would go get in the black line for food. And, the only white guy in the whole black line for food because all it seemed like it was a big
I
Big
can't take
matter of
it.
pride to the blacks. Oh, I never eat pork.
Swine.
So there's me with my tray out. Yes, it cost me my dessert. It would cost a couple other good things on the
I love
tray.
it. Oh
But I'd
man.
walk away from the food line with about a dozen pork chops.
Yo.
And boy, were they good.
And the guys at the white table didn't complain about me going through the black line. I still sat at the white table with the
Grab as
dozen
much
pork
pork
chops.
chops as you can.
Hey, Craig, let me ask you something. So you
Oh man.
you're free now, and you mentioned about getting a mentor when you first got in and getting mentored and schooled on what's legit and what's not legit, right? Like it seems like that's a regular thing that happens to everybody. Happens, I got it too, everybody. But now that you're out, is there anybody that's like you can go, hey man, here's the mentor. I'm gonna take you under my wing. This is how life goes out, outside after 20 years.
Well, to be honest, I told you about the guy that just got out of prison on Monday.
Yeah.
And as you know, people that serve a long time, I mentioned how, all these different appeals and all that fail. An inmate won't, a long-termer doesn't believe anything. The law comes out that's guaranteed to get him out of prison.
Right.
After you've become jaded for a few years, I'll see it to believe it.
Yeah.
I was told by several people that were positive that Trump had already signed my commutation. But my answer to all of them was the same as I'll believe it as soon as it's in my hand.
Yeah.
Right, for real. So they call my name and say, pack up. I'll believe it then.
Yeah.
But my friend that just got out of prison on Monday, his family's telling him things, and naturally he doesn't trust anything after all those years in prison and all that. So he's leaning on me now for what actually is true and what his family's telling him.
So Aaron, was it tough for you? And we're jumping sort of ahead of my agenda here, but you're bringing up, a point, Craig, of release and adjustment.
Yeah.
Was it hard for you to trust? And what else was hard for you when you got out of prison?
I think that's the most unspoken about aspect of the prison experience, Richard, is that, there's huge levels of trauma. Like obviously everybody knows prison's hard. It's not easy. And the way I grew up and a lot of other people grew up on the streets wasn't easy either. But coming home, honestly, I think in many ways, it's this decompression phase that it's like you're sent to not even China, it's the moon. You're in a whole new world, particularly for those of us that were, in for a decade, 2 decades, 3 decades. You're so far removed from society and institutionalized. It's super bad.
What does institutionalized mean? What does it mean when an inmate is shot?
So, well, the institutionalization is just like this idea. It's an academic thing, but people use it. The media is that you're fixated to that like prison experience. Like everything is based on this consciousness connected to the yard, to the block, to your interaction with other
your routine.
It's deprogramming.
Yes, exactly. You're programmed in a certain way. And what happens when people come home is there's no debrief. Like we have our best
exactly.
There's no debrief. When they come back from war, and in some ways in the prison system can be a war-like environment. So
yeah.
And we're also programmed as robots, particularly as men, to be these hyper masculine, aggressive assholes. So then we try to have interactions with females, and we're like, I want to fuck this bitch, and I'm gonna do this, that, and we're not treating women with respect.
Good point, Aaron.
We don't know how to have a social relationship or how to like talk to our children if we have them, or like for me, I got married and I couldn't talk to my wife, man. Like I had this huge disconnect because like my wife would not attack me, but like come up me with problems and like get in my face. And to me, I see that as an attack. There's this proximity thing. And I'm like, whoa, you got to back the fuck up and not talk to me like that.
And
but I didn't know how to tell her like how I was feeling.
And she's a woman who hung in there with you and sacrificed.
She did for years until I got my divorce. But, that was, I have a beautiful baby girl out of it, which I learned a lot from too. And I think that was like 5 or 6 years ago. So like initially the trauma stuff was huge and I didn't understand what was wrong with me when I come home. Now as an academic and someone that works heavily in reentry, and I work with juvenile lifers, meaning kids that went in that picked up the life sentence like Craig, but they went in at 15, 16 years old. and their disconnect is huge, but I see it. So I watch them come out, I take them to the store, and they're like in shock. They're like
Aaron,
almost want to grab my hand and be like, oh my God, I'm in mire.
Everything puts them in
Everything
shock.
is like overwhelming, and there's this huge color, sounds, proximity, all these things are shocking to them, and they're getting anxious and they don't know why the hell they are. And I explain to them, like, look, this is okay, this is normal, because you've been institutionalized. You're so used to that environment, you're not used to like coming out of that water.
So
Aaron,
go ahead. I was just going to mention a question we have here from James. He asks, is there, or are there, excuse me, mental health services available inside of a prison?
This is where I fall over and laugh, right?
if you take a drug program, maybe.
Yeah.
Why do you laugh?
I mean, there are some programs, but let's be honest, like the largest mental health provider in the United States, you know where it is? Cook County Jail.
Is it? Where?
Cook County Jail. Cook County Jail.
Yeah.
Like, and if you look at the whole U.S. system, like we're the prison population is the only one guaranteed medical coverage. But what type of coverage they get, we all know that's not very great. And mental health is just a
So
small.
did you avail yourself of it in prison?
Did I ever avail myself of any mental health services?
Yes.
I tried it at a couple points, like particularly when I was in segregation. There was this young Asian guy that would come in there and teach us mindfulness, and I was like all about getting out of my cell, even though I would get 5-point shackles on me to sit there and do some Buddha stuff that I honestly thought was whack at the time. But then I was like, holy shit, I love this stuff. And it was very helpful for me to kind of center my body, to meditate and do yoga and all this stuff. But like, that's not something that's like really normal.
In my prison,
mental
they
health
gave out Prozac like
between-
candy. They distribute Prozac to everybody. It was like,
yeah, in segregation, that's the default like mental health spot.
what about you, Craig? Did you ever see a shrink in prison?
No, I didn't. No, I didn't. The closest I came is I was one of the suicide watch companions.
Oh yeah.
Where people that they would lock them in a room with a glass door on it, and you watch to make sure they didn't kill themselves. Yeah.
I have a question
That's
for
an
Aaron.
upbeat job.
Well, Aaron, to add on to what you were saying earlier, like, did you ever feel yourself when you came home sensitive or hypersensitive to like disrespect?
Oh,
Someone
absolutely.
spoke to
That's
you
a
wrong.
great question,
like,
Dick.
I felt like, yo, I'll be honest with you, I went through that. Like people talking to you, like, yo, who you talking to? Like, are you out your mind? You crazy? Like, I would just react just like I was still in prison, because people disrespect you with the smallest things. That is,
you gotta smack them in the face,
but in prison,
you can't keep,
we just can't have it. We just can't have it.
And Divine, that's like one of the biggest things too that's connected to like a lot of the trauma therapy work I do with my reentry program, is that, you know, I get with a lot of these hyper masculine men and tell them, say, look, I'm still a big dude. I'm 6 foot, 250 pounds, mean asshole. But like, I've learned to control that. And it's taken me 13 years to get to that point. But like, a lot of them are, like you said, they come home, they've got that penitentiary mentality. They're puffed up. They're looking around them all the time. Don't bump into me. So it takes like my guess is this, from an academic piece, is that for every year you do inside, you need that many years to decompress out on the streets. And
Interesting.
So like,
certainly not given that.
Honestly, the last 3 years or so, I've really started to feel kind of like semi-normal. I don't think it ever goes away, but like I felt a lot better now today. Like, I have less nightmares and thoughts about prison as I did when that first year out. I was thinking about the police chasing me, drug dealers, rivals kicking in my family's door, going back in the block. All these different violent things were constantly in my consciousness.
It took me 10 years to stop dreaming about prison related stuff.
Wow.
Crazy. How long have you been out, Aaron?
So a little more than 13 years now. This March will be 14.
Great.
And I think that's something you wanted me to talk about, Richard. I'll bring that up real quick. So March 3rd, I have a very special day. So, and I'm not proud of this by any means, but like, you know, I had a violent confrontation with law enforcement involving a firearm. Okay. And as we all know, felons are not allowed to have guns. Okay. There's a unique thing here in Michigan where after so many years, after being off of paper or just released without parole, you can put in for the circuit court to have your gun rights restored. So I've got a hearing this Wednesday coming up, which I'm super excited about, not because I want to go out and shoot people again, but because I think as an American that, you know, I have a right. Why the hell should I be in a second class status where everybody else in the world, particularly in Michigan, there's probably 1 billion guns. Why can't I have a gun? Why can't I
serve
go
your time.
and protect myself and get a registered firearm? You know, I'm a professor, director, all this other stuff, but it's always that felon. That's that first prefix for me. So I think I have a really interesting opportunity to make that go away to where, you know, I can legally own a firearm and not have to worry about, you know, the police kicking my door in and taking
That's
me.
great, man. I'm giving you good vibes on that for sure. That's a big step, and that's
How many of us would like to have a gun if we had the opportunity to have one? Not you, Craig? Maybe.
Maybe.
I definitely. I'm actually trying to get my rights back right now as we speak.
trying to do a partner.
Okay. Awesome.
I don't even believe in guns, but I just feel like
I believe in the Second Amendment.
I
The same here. I mean, I think it's a choice. It's not even a choice. I think it's a right that's drawn out for us.
Yeah, I believe.
my
in
greatest fear is
that.
my greatest fear is I'd have to use it. You know,
Yeah.
and would I pull the trigger? You know, I pray that I would never have to be in that situation. You know, that
But
would.
what if you were? I mean, like, think about your family, Richard. If you or your family was in a dire situation and where you had the choice between saving your life or theirs and harming
No,
someone
I mean,
else,
I hear you, and I raised my hand, but you know, we can't ignore the fact that people who are most adamant about the Second Amendment and having guns
Mhm.
are not really just benignly want to protect themselves. They show
No,
up at the
absolutely.
U.S. Capitol
Yeah.
and they break
Good point.
down walls.
Yeah.
And they conspire to kidnap your governor because they're
Right.
crazy
Absolutely.
motherfuckers.
Yeah, they excessively believe in the Second Amendment.
Mhm.
Well, to an absurd level, as far as I can tell. All of a sudden, they're constitutional scholars. About
They are, and they're not at all.
fucking
None of them are
amendment.
dumb hillbillies. I'll say this, Richard. Like, and if
Agreed.
anybody reads the Second Amendment, it says very clearly a well-regulated militia.
Militia.
So, you know, no, well, I'm not hitting on the militia point. Well-regulated. Well-regulated. So that means I think, and I agree with, we should be able to have firearms, but nobody should be carrying around a fucking 50 caliber sniper
Yeah,
rifle.
no idiots
open
allowed.
carry in a state capitol. That's just ridiculous.
Or in a saloon.
Or in a saloon, or yeah. There's no need for stuff like that. And do you need 10,000 rounds of ammunition in one spot? No.
Yeah.
I
You
so
need
I
to
think
protect
there
your
are
house.
like
Yeah,
regulations
coming.
that we can put in place that are you know, effective and
All right. So if I'm watching this, I'm looking at my friend Craig, and Craig, among the five of us, you are the calmest, the easiest to smile and laugh. You're serene, you're pacific, and yet you're the guy who's done the most time and who lived under the most pressure about seeing the rest of their life, you know, being spent that way. How do you do that? I mean, what's with you, man? I mean, how, you know, I don't even trust you for this.
Well, if there's one thing you learn in prison, it's patience.
Chill.
Because
Oh,
if you're
man.
waiting for a court to do something on a timely basis, it just doesn't happen.
Never happens.
If you're waiting for supper to be at the right time, it doesn't happen.
Right.
You just learn that, you know.
You're not bitter, Craig. You're not bitter. You didn't feel like you got fucked over.
I got fucked over by people, but not the system, is my way of looking at it. I think the system can and should work, but it has no oversight. There's too many people that just don't follow the system. Wardens that just don't serve the right food. Prosecutors that don't give you the discovery in your case so you know that there's more evidence to clear you than there is to convict you.
So is that human error? I mean, is that purposely? Is that
Too
purposely?
often, you know,
Human error.
like I say, those people do it deliberately. But a lot of that's because there's no oversight on them. Who really goes through and checks to make sure a prosecutor did his job correctly?
Oh, good
Who even
point.
make sure a defense lawyer did his job correctly?
Good point.
That's where our failure is. The system isn't the failure. The people are. And the fact that the people aren't, you know, exposed to any oversight. How many inspectors did you see come into prison while you were there?
Never.
You've seen administrators from other prisons come. Those aren't inspectors. Those are buddies.
So,
I think the system.
so I'm going to ask all four of you guys the same question. and try to answer this without really giving it too much thought, which is how I've gone through my life, by the way. What I'd like to know is, what do the movies and TV have totally wrong regarding prison and incarceration? What do they get wrong? Aaron.
I think the biggest misconception is the oversaturation of violence and sexual assault in penitentiaries. I think that's sensationalized, and that's, does it happen? We all know it happens. Does it happen every 5 seconds? And when the little fish comes in, do all the piranhas come and get him? No. That's
not like Oz, that TV show.
It is not like, oh my God, Oz is entertaining, but total bullshit.
Right.
So Orange is the New Black.
Okay, that would have been my answer too. Seth.
But I will say this really quick. The Shawshank Redemption, in my opinion, is probably the most accurate portrayal of penitentiary life. I think a lot of that is really realistic in that, and a lot of the lifestyles and the connections with the corruptness of the system and the livelihood of the individual.
Is that the best prison movie ever made?
I think a lot of people think that.
Is it the realest, or is it?
I think it's the realest and maybe the best. I'd say both.
I think it's the best. Seth, what do they have wrong in prison?
No, it's the same. I mean, I totally agree that I spent a year in county jail and learned a lot in county and all that. And then, I was like, oh, when I got sentenced, you go to big boy prison, and I thought, oh shit, here we go. Like I thought, and I found out county jail was 10 times worse than prison ever was. And I saw the first day I saw what I thought was a woman walk through the line, like, oh, this is a co-ed prison. Like, this is no big deal.
A woman.
There was no woman. Do you agree with Aaron? The level of violence and sexual violence is overblown because it sells.
Yes, I do agree with him. But my answer, because he took that one from me, he spoke first. I'm gonna say that people who incarcerate are negative and hopeless. When really in prison, we are very positive and hopeful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What do you think, Craig?
I agree that it's overblown as far as the rapes and sexual assaults and all that, because that's all they have to go on, I guess, to talk about. But really, what they're leaving out is a lot of the hopelessness and the waste of the people. That they don't really show how people aren't moving forward in there. A few that are taking some classes or reading their books and all that, but so many of them, they play poker all day.
Yeah. What do you make of the fact we work, Seth Devine and I work with, and you guys too in your work, a lot of people who are reentering, returning citizens, and we're constantly amazed how almost every one of these men and women want to not forget about the past. They don't want to get some job. They want to sort of give back to the community. They want to do a nonprofit. They want to help one another. Why is that? I mean, if these are violent people and awful people, and I don't know what you're doing there, but it's kind of freaking me out, Aaron, with your hands.
Yeah, I'm typing. Someone's texting me. Can I answer that real quick? So
if you put your hands down, then the answer would be yes.
This is freaking out. Okay. Yeah. I think this misperception of people inside is that, Divine kind of touched on this. There's a lot of good people in there that did just bad things. We made mistakes, and people age out of crime. That's a criminological concept that's been proven over decades.
Crime. You don't see 60-year-olds slinging drugs,
slinging dope, punching someone in the face, shooting at the police. It just doesn't happen.
I think a lot of crime that's committed is circumstantial, right? It's the environment you grew up in, the peer pressure. There's so many different things. Yeah. It's not oh, I'm just waking up in the morning, I'm a diabolical criminal.
Yeah. So
Divine, predator. I want to just go out and just commit crimes.
Exactly. And I think that's the heart of, the era of mass incarceration that we're in right now. So if you go back in time to the early 70s, we had 200,000 or 300,000 people incarcerated nationwide.
Now we have 2.5 million.
Yeah. And so now has everybody lost their shit and become crazy? No. There's been very specific policies, redlining districts,
Yes.
in access of jobs,
Yes.
racial, discrimination, economic disparity. All these different things have been very specifically created
It's
artificially by the
systematic. It's
government,
systematic.
which
Yeah.
creates illicit economies. So the government, in reality, is responsible for 80 to 90% of the crime rate.
Agreed. And that's the point I was getting to.
Yeah. All right. This has been amazing, all of you guys. At this point, normally I take like 2 minutes and something I call my rant. For those of you who know me well, I am endlessly annoyed by things. To me, everywhere I look, there's something that just sort of pisses me off, and I feel like I'm the only sane person in an insane world, which probably makes me totally insane. But I find that being able to share this sort of gets me through my day. So perhaps you'll kind of dig where I'm coming from, or perhaps you'll just put up with it. Either way, I appreciate it. Why should I be the only one who's miserable, really? Normally I point out things that I think are wrong or horrible in the system, but this week something actually good happened. This week, Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker signed a bill that made it in Illinois the first state in the country to abolish cash bail. Cash bail payments for jail release for people who've been arrested and who are awaiting their case to be heard. This is something that a lot of people are not really all that familiar with, but when they do, they're absolutely amazed that this could even be going on in this country. Mm-hmm. So what is it all about? If you're arrested in this country, typically you get sent to jail. And when you go to jail, you have to await a hearing with a judge. And the judge will decide if you are a risk to be sent out back to the public awaiting your trial to determine if you're guilty or not. And typically, depending on who you are and the risk and the crime and the alleged crime that's involved, they will set bail. The bail being an amount of money that you or a loved one has to come up with, essentially, so as to ensure that you will return for your hearing when it is set to occur. For many people who have money, putting up bail money is not a big deal. They have homes that they can pledge, and it's an easy price to get their ass out of prison very quickly, particularly if you have a good attorney who's friendly with the whole system there. They get out really quickly. The problem happens when you're someone who has allegedly committed a crime and the judge sets your bail at $500 or $1,000 or $10,000 or whatever it is. And
like
guess
Khalif
what?
Browder.
What's that?
Like Khalif Browder in New York.
Khalif.
Okay. And you don't have the money to put up for bail, and you don't have a loved one who has the money to be put up for bail. So what ends up happening is you end up cooling your heels in jail and until your case comes up. And this could be a couple of days, but more likely it's much longer. Many times it involves an out of jurisdiction case, and there's a bench warrant for you, and that's going to take months and months and months for it to be resolved. Or the courts are all backed up because of the coronavirus or whatever the case may be. And you are been arrested, and there's been absolutely no reason to think that you're guilty other than the fact that the cop thought you were guilty. There's a constitutional right that presumably we all have that's based upon the predicate that you're, innocent until proven guilty. That's what we all assume. That's sort of like, the idealized version of our criminal justice system. But the reality of it is you are thrown into the Seth was talking about county jail. I was in Rikers. And that is like easily one of the most evil places on the earth. And I was, thank God I was only there for a few weeks because I had a sister who somehow or another got me out of there, begged the attorney, get him, whatever, he doesn't belong there. But there are people there who are there for years. And when you're there for years, and particularly if you don't believe you're guilty, it's not hard to understand how your attitude might suffer a little bit, how you might get into trouble. How about when a guard like hits you for the 11th time and you say, enough is enough, I'm not going to let this guy hit me. That when you had the opportunity, maybe if you were on the outside, you could help build your case. You could bring in evidence. You could find the guy who could prove your alibi that you weren't even there at the time. But you have none of this opportunity. And you're relying upon some poor schmuck of a public defender who has 9,000 cases. And even if they want to do right by you, they just don't have the means to do it. It's an impossibility. So you're sitting there in jails, which are not as nice as prisons are. And you are just being brutalized while you're there, day after day after day. And you can't get out of there. And no one has even proven you've done a thing wrong. And then finally, you've been there for a long time. And then the prosecutor, the assistant district attorney, some young guy typically, who's trying to make his bones by getting as many convictions as he or she can, because he or she has aspirations within the criminal justice system to move on. They come to you with a plea deal. And you say, you know something? Going to prison for a couple of years sounds a hell of a lot better than spending God knows how long I'm going to be spending in Rikers Island. And so what do? You accept the plea deal. And by doing that, you have sealed the rest of your life that you have this felony conviction that is essentially a life sentence, that when you do finally get out, you'll never get a job, or certainly it won't be easy. You won't find a home. It'll affect your relationships. It'll affect every aspect of your life. And why? Not because you were guilty of something, not because even that you were young and you made a stupid mistake, but because some cop picked you up, threw you in there, and you didn't have the money to pay bail. That's a poor tax. That is it's just awful. It's just awful. And if that doesn't piss you off, I don't know what does.
But that was a great one, man. You're gonna get a shot for inciting a riot with getting everybody riled up on that one.
Yeah, for real.
Yeah, you're STG now.
Well, you say all you was doing was telling the truth. It's an insulin shot.
It's pretty fucked up.
Yep.
And I salute the state of Illinois, and I salute Governor Pritzker for doing this. All that means is there are another 49 states that have to do the same exact thing. We're a long way off where anybody can talk about, equity in the system as long as that shit can go on. So, any event, that's my rant. I'm sticking with it. I want to thank everybody for joining us. Aaron, you are absolutely amazing. We could be talking to you for 3 more hours, and I hope you'll come back and hang out with us.
I'd be happy to, Richard.
You're so, and we haven't even gotten into how you ended up being a professor in college and what that's all about. I'm sure that's a fascinating story. And Craig, every time I see you, I just want to give you a hug and just hold on so that there's no chance of you going anywhere else but where you are right now. And your smile really does my soul a lot of good,
Absolutely.
So we're really thrilled that you're our friend. What we do typically at the end here for people who just want to hang out, last week we did this and people were here till 2 a.m. in this room just hanging out. If anybody wants to continue, they want to connect, they want to make friends, they have something they want to share, please do. We love that. That's what we're all about. We ask you all to please tell your friends about the work we're doing. Tell your friends who have records to go to Commissary Club. Invite your friends to come to the yard if you like what we're doing. If you don't, or if you think we could do it better, please let us know. If you have ideas, we'd love to hear them. When I shut up finally, there'll be a screen that'll come up that'll have all of our contact info. Please follow us on Instagram, follow us on Twitter. And if you want to be a guest in a future episode of The Yard, Adrian's contact info, you'll see, please contact her. and engage with her on that. You know, there are 70 million of us with records, 70 million. And then there's about 100 million of our friends and family who are equally impacted by what we go through in the criminal justice system. That's like half the country. We could elect any president we want. We could get so much, we could make this world a whole lot better if we all came together, if we all looked after ourselves and each other. You know, if we were just available to each other and connected to each other. So please, when you have that opportunity, please don't squander it. Be there for each other. Thank you so much, Seth. A pleasure as always. Divine, you're my boys. I really appreciate time with you. And Aaron and Craig, you guys are amazing and inspirations. Peace, everybody. See you next time next week.
Aaron and Craig, thanks so much. All right, guys.